You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have such interesting guests on board today. The founder of a soon-to-be-launched quality general magazine, sort of like The New Yorker, but with all women writers. The fearless, whip-smart organizer, international peace expert, and activist who founded the group Voice of Libyan Women. And a witty feminist evolutionary biologist who will let us in on how much insects can teach us about sex and other evolutionary goodies. But first, we need to look inside the headlines. It didn't make real headline status, but it was a story inside the New York Times by Cara Buckley on small gains for female playwrights. And the story is interesting because roughly 1/5 of the productions staged at hundreds of theaters all across the country over the past 3 seasons were by women. A fifth. The study, overseen by the playwrights Julia Jordan and Marcia Norman, is called The Count, and it's going to be updated each year. Until now, other than a handful of older analyses, sort of spotty here and there, it had been unclear just how many female playwrights were getting staged, according to Jordan. She said, "We did this, we wanted to create a baseline and to document the change, hoping that there will be change." A 2002 report from the New York State Council on the Arts found 17% of productions across the country had female playwrights, and now the figure sits at 22%, which is a real increase. But interestingly enough, also, the numbers revealed surprising differences by city. Over the last 3 seasons, about 36% of productions in Chicago were by women playwrights. In Berkeley, 29%. You go, Berkeley. But in Portland, Oregon, only 17.5% of the productions were by women. Norman said, "If life worked the way theater does, then 4 of the 5 things heard in an entire life would be said by men. That's a grim prospect, given how much valuable information comes to us from women." She's absolutely right, of course. The play's the thing to test the conscience, not necessarily of the king in this case, but of all of us. We need to have female playwrights with all the art that they can bring in so many different ways to the stage be produced. And now it's time for my first guest. Jillian Goodman was an intern at New York Magazine, and then she was hired as an online producer for their Vulture blog, and then she moved elsewhere in magazine publishing, and she's currently an editor at Fast Company, but she is the founder of the soon-to-be-launched online and print magazine that is all women, and it was financed on Kickstarter. Here she is. Jillian Goodman, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. Jillian, it's good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for starting Mary, which is, and I want you to tell people why it's called Mary, because those are wonderful quotes on the website. Mary is going to be an amazing women's magazine with women writers, a general magazine with women writers. It's just that all the investigative journalism and the essays and the profiles and the poetry and the fiction happens to be women, female people. And so, of course, it's inherently feminist, but you have a general audience in mind. It sounds elegant and intelligent and very, very welcome. I want to read it yesterday already. Tell us how this came to be.
This came to be, just one of those things, one of those moments when sort of everything coalesces. Obviously this, women's representation in media and general interest media in particular has been sorely lacking for a number of years now. And, you look at the statistics that Evita, the for women, the Organization for Women in the Literary Arts has been doing its count now for 4 or 5 years, and you just look at those statistics every year, and they don't, certain publications have made an effort to bring more women into their, ranks of writers, but on the whole, it just doesn't seem to be getting better, or at least not getting better fast enough.
Right. Well, the Women's Media Center does an annual report on the status of women in media, and that's all media, and it just it makes you crazy year after year after year. That's including men write most of the books that get reviewed, men write most of the book reviews, men write, it just goes on and on and on. So this is a very welcome change.
Yes, thank you. And it's also, I think women often get somewhat confusing or disheartening advice, too, about how to position themselves. Often it feels like you are forced to choose between speaking to an audience of only women or pitching ideas with men in mind, and that, with male editors in mind, the kind of ideas that a male editor is going to be looking for.
Right.
And that it's a choice that it makes me uncomfortable. And so what I wanted to do is, as you said, and I'm, very happy to hear you say that. I believe that this is inherently feminist, is just like, everything belongs here. The stories that belong in the New Yorker, I think that we would benefit, all of us would benefit as a society from having more of those stories about, the economy and politics and war written by women, not necessarily in the way a man would write them.
Right.
Though.
Well, all issues are women's issues. The
Exactly.
the words quote women's issues make me crazy because we're more than half the human species. So kind of, all issues are our issues. And you're doing fiction and profiles and investigative journalism and poetry and essays. This is just wonderful. This is exactly the kind of thing that we were able to do when I was editor-in-chief of Ms. from 1990 to 1994. We added back in poetry because it had been missing and fiction from the magazine for years. We added in investigative journalism. But, Ms. itself is a sort of an institution and a feminist institution. So many men did read it, but many men thought it was Mizzy. It was, only for women. So you're going to launch in a different time and with a different wonderful assumption that women can and do everything. When are you planning to launch?
Right now, we have our eyes on launching a website somewhere midwinter, December, January, February. I'm hoping to have a print magazine sometime around May or June next year. But, I want to give this as much time as it needs.
Right,
I think that,
of course.
That's better for the writers. It's better for the project as a whole.
Right.
So those are our goals at the moment. But
I was going to ask, were you going to do a print edition as well? And I think that's very wise and wonderful that you do. That you're planning to do, even though it will complicate your life enormously. With distribution and with, oh my God, and printers, but still, I think it's so important to cover that base as well. That's incredible. And you fundraised for this on Kickstarter.
Yes.
Wow, that in itself is a courageous act. How did that come about?
It was quite nerve-wracking. I started to fundraise. I wanted to fundraise privately because, putting something that's unfinished in front of a large audience and saying, please support this is quite a nerve-wracking process. So I tried fundraising privately and found that to be, on the one hand, found that to be somewhat frustrating. It was a very slow process. It was difficult to get people interested. And then I sought out advice from people I knew who'd started media projects or were involved in the fundraising world in one way or another, and almost universally everyone said, why on earth aren't you doing Kickstarter? Kickstarter was made for projects like this. I'm very pleased that we were fully funded. We got more than our ask eventually. So.
You should have asked more. You see, there you go.
that was immediately what started going through my head.
There's no website yet for the magazine that will launch, as you said. But when you put into Google Mary a review, the Kickstarter website comes up, and it has some description of what the magazine will be, as well as some wonderful quotes about Mary. To share some of those with the listeners, and why you calling it Mary.
Yeah, sure. The first one comes from Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and I thought of that line in I believe it's the prologue where she says, call me Mary Beaton, Mary Seton, Mary Carmichael, it makes no difference.
Right.
In her persona as the fictional narrator. And then the other one on the page is from the TV show Gilmore Girls, where there's a running joke in the first season where Rory Gilmore's classmates tease her by calling her Mary. And at first they're referring to her as, the Virgin Mary. She's like this doe-eyed transfer from small-town public school.
Right.
And the line that's on the Kickstarter page, she's just done something horrible. She's just insulted a popular girl, basically. And so someone calls her Mary again, and she says, "Oh, not this Mary stuff again." And not this Virgin Mary stuff again. And the person responds to her, "Not virgin, typhoid."
Yes, it's wonderful.
So there are just all of these Marys. There are all of these Marys in human history, and it seemed like such an essential sort of elemental thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's how we landed on that title.
It's just terrific. And you will not have time, I can tell you as a former editor-in-chief, you will not have time to wash your hair or go to the bathroom for the next 3 or 4 years. So just, as long as you know that, and you basically have given up on sleep. Who needs sleep anyway?
No.
This is going to be just fantastic. And when you actually launch, please let us know so you can come back on the program and we can celebrate that.
That will be my pleasure. Thank you so much, Robin.
It's time for a short break here on Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And we'll be right back with a woman who is the perfect balance of pragmatist and idealist. She's Libyan and she's a jewel. Stick with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. At age 15, Alaa Murabit enrolled in medical school in Zawiya, Libya, and she also found time somehow to found the Voice of Libyan Women, VLW, in 2011. She acts as an advisor to numerous international security boards and think tanks, including the UN Women Global Advisory Board and Harvard's Every Woman Everywhere initiative. She's the first Ashoka Fellow elected from Libya, and she was named the International Trust Women Hero 2014 by the New York Times and one of 25 women under 25 to watch by Newsweek. That young, that talented, such good politics. Alaa, welcome to the program. Marhaba.
Hi, Robin. Thank you for having me.
Tell us mostly about the current situation of women in Libya, and also because you travel the region, but specifically we get so little and such fragmented news out of Libya, except tribal fighting, what a mess. And you founded the Voice of Libyan Women in 2011. So first, let's start with that.
Well, I think Libya, the current situation is quite interesting because it actually is an amplification of the regional dynamic and of international politics as a whole. There's a very polarized feel for the whole community. You're either on this side or that side. You're either with us or against us. And this plays out very negatively most for women because they don't take up arms on the front line. However, they're expected to entirely support a side. And if they don't show public support for that side, they do get persecuted, and particularly women human rights defenders.
Yes.
When you have the general female population in Libya, it's very much in line with what's happening to the whole community. Young men, women, the older generations find it very, very difficult for them to be safe and secure in their own communities. For women, there are added risks of driving after dark if your community is in active conflict. There's the added risk of being related to somebody who's working within the conflict, right?
Sure.
So, and there's a complete, I guess, lack of recognition for their involvement or for their experiences or for their voices, and that to me is actually the most troubling of them all.
They started the revolution, women.
They did, and conflict is no kind of it's not a stranger, not in the region, not in the world, right?
Right.
But what has been so shocking is that there's been a complete disappearance of women's voices. There's been a complete exclusion of their experiences. When we're talking about peace talks, and this is both nationally and with kind of the support of the local community, but also the international community.
Yeah.
There's been a very, very little attempt to get women at the table and to have women be part of the conversation. And I think that is what is probably the most frightening for me for future generations, is kind of this belief that this conflict is entirely male-driven and the solution will be entirely male-driven.
I mean, Resolution 1325, which for any listener who's been on Mars doesn't know, is the women's movement-driven resolution passed some time ago that mandates women have to be included in peacemaking and peacekeeping decision-making process. But enforcement is another matter altogether, and it just drives you crazy because this is Algeria all over again. This is what every woman activist I know in the region said must not happen again, that we make the revolution, we suffer, we die, we started in many cases. Certainly this time around women did, and in Libya women did, and then we get sidelined and disappeared. It's just amazing.
And I think with 1325, when we talk about implementation, a lot of it also comes from political will, right?
Exactly.
Because the only time I hear about Libya when it comes to women's rights only, well, it's cultural. Let's not talk about that. It's cultural. There are limitations, except when they come to economic issues or political issues, it's no longer cultural, right? They'll find ways to move past those. So for me, the idea of not including women, we cannot keep saying that's cultural. We have to start saying, okay, there's a lack of political will. How do we incentivize the involvement of women? How do we tell states internationally that the involvement of women is necessary, right? Because right now we're just not doing a good enough job. And an example of this would be we had members of the international community come to a national dialogue meeting, and they said to the young Libyan counterpart, well, where are your women? You know, where's your female representation, if you will? And he responded, he said, well, where's yours? He's telling me about it, but where is yours? And so I think we need to start saying, as a whole, everybody needs to start bringing women who are capable, who understand the importance of women's involvement politically, economically, and socially to the table so that they can also be part of the conversation, not only about peace, but about institution building, about the political and economic future of the country, about education and health, right? And they can bring perspectives from women who work within these communities and know other women and say, okay, well, what is most difficult for you? Because if you talk to a member of a brigade, he's going to say the most important thing to him is that the electricity doesn't cut on the main road so that they can transport goods. And a young woman will probably say the most important thing to her is that her child's school doesn't get attacked in the middle of the day. Or that she's able to have a safe road for her to go to work because they usually have to walk in, near distances as teachers. So there are different demands when we're talking about peace and security, and we have to be very inclusive of that definition, or else it just won't be sustainable.
Well, security, we know this by now. Security means very different things to women than it does to men in most cultures. I would venture pretty much all. And we also know that when you listen to women, when aid goes directly to women, when women's strategies are followed, it benefits the whole family, whereas that's not always true if you give aid to men. Not only as an organizer in Libya, but as an advisor to a number of international security boards and think tanks like UN Women Global Advisory Board and Harvard's Every Woman Everywhere initiative, you have a unique input. What do you tell them would that they should do tactically or strategically to genuinely, not just lip service, involve more women?
Honestly, I tell them to listen to the women on the ground. Like that is, I can sum up all my advisory for anyone listening. That is basically what I will tell you nonstop.
Yep.
Listen to the women on the ground. Nobody is listening to them. They know what is coming. They know the changes in their own community. They recognize within their own extended family units if there's extremism rising or if there's any of these major core issues.
Well, a number of the Voices of Libyan Women programs, this organization, the NGO that you founded, like the Noor campaign, are now being picked up and imitated internationally. I mean, the Noor campaign, if I'm correct, invokes Islamic teaching to combat violence against women, because in many cases, women in the villages are told this is, by their imams or by their mullahs, that this is Islam. And how is it working in Libya, and is it being replicated now internationally?
Well, the methodology for the Noor campaign is being replicated both in Muslim-majority countries as well as in countries which aren't. And most of them are predominantly in the MENA region, but we also go as far as Malaysia and Indonesia.
Right.
When it comes to the Noor campaign, the basis was exactly as you said. Local community leaders and even national religious leaders were telling women that, or even kind of implying in their speeches, including political leaders, that women's role was not necessarily public, that women, their strength because of our faith was as, the leaders of the family. And I don't deny that. I don't deny that a woman leads the family. I also think that by default, she can lead a community. So,
yes.
I didn't necessarily disagree with them entirely, and I didn't want it to seem as though it was an outright kind of war between women's rights or religion, because I knew we would lose a lot of grassroots
That's
support.
right. Yeah.
So what we did instead was we approached it differently. The first year of the Voice of Libyan Women, we had been doing a lot of international resolution training. We had done 1325 training and CEDAW training, and we had gotten extensively attacked by the more conservative base, saying that we were, heretics, and name it, we were, right?
Yeah, of course.
So when we launched the Noor campaign, we took into mind those voices a lot as well, because those are the voices I think that we need to really get buy-in from when we're talking about women's rights. We don't need people who already believe in women's rights to, sit in rooms and say, all of us be yes men. Like, we already know, we agree. But we need to get new voices. We need to get women who have been told for generations that this is their role by, their mothers and their grandmothers.
Right.
So the Noor campaign really picked up kind of on the cultural and the social undertones of why women's rights is in the position it's in, not only in Libya, but throughout the region. And a lot of it comes from a lack of religious education and knowledge.
Right.
It comes from being told what you should believe and being told what you should be, rather than actually kind of understanding the context and the texts themselves. So to get credibility, because we are a women's rights organization, we did International Purple Hijab Day, which is on February 13th, and it's annual. And we ask people to put on a purple scarf or tie in support of action against domestic violence. And it's really more about solidarity. And we did it initially to test the waters before the Noor campaign. We wanted to see how this would go over with local communities.
Right.
And there was phenomenal support. The first year we did it, we had 17,000 Libyans take part across the country.
Oh,
and we had the Libyan Prime Minister. Yeah, and we had the Libyan Prime Minister on national TV publicly wear it and say he entirely supports action against domestic violence.
My God, congratulations.
Thank you. And it's such a taboo issue. So we were extremely encouraged by this, right? We were like, we can go through and we can do this.
Right.
The one kind of difficulty we had and one obstacle we had was that some communities, people who had already been very adamantly opposed to us said, well, where are you coming up with this kind of religious interpretation? And I'm like, well, we didn't make it up.
Right.
But we clearly needed, in their eyes, more religious kind of foundation. We needed religious credibility. So we approached the House of Fatwas, which is the leading Libyan religious institution, and said, these are the hadiths, these are the sayings of the Prophet that we want to use, these are the verses from the Holy Book we want to use, and we only needed them to certify that those were authentic. We needed this religious institution to say, this organization is not manipulating anything.
Right.
These are actually in our book. This is the way women should actually be treated.
Right.
And once they did that, that opened tremendous doors, and the Noor campaign ended up reaching 50,000 people directly, over 39,000 surveys from young men, women, girls, boys. We went into schools, we went into homes, we went into mosques. We had imams do their Friday sermons around issues which relate to family and most importantly to women. So from as far as domestic violence all the way to girls' education. So we were extremely pleased with that effect. And initially, I think the women's movement in Libya was somewhat opposed to the idea of mixing the two. And I've noticed that the intersection of women's rights and religion is a very, very controversial issue around the world.
Right. But
I think that's
strategically and tactically, at a certain point, it may very well be necessary, and depending on the region we're talking about, and I think that women all know that somewhere inside of herself, every woman knows. So whatever we need to do to reach her and make it possible for her to speak, it seems worthwhile doing to me. Worldwide, we need to always keep every possible door open, whether it's for women in religious context or younger women or women of different ethnicity. I mean, the global women's movement is a voice of the majority of people on the planet, so it's never going to be all one thing, I hope. It's always going to be a glorious mix.
No, I completely agree, and I thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's so necessary for us to embrace the voices of, minorities, and from my perspective, obviously, from the younger generation, because I think that there is a belief almost that the way we're doing it is always right, and I think that enriching the conversation within the women's movement itself, having people who have gone through this for 40, 45 years, saying, listen, we've tried that, step back.
Yeah, we can teach you our mistakes. That's about all that we have to offer. Listen, we've got to go, Alaa, but give the website of Voices of Libyan Women, and tell if there's any way that listeners can be supportive and certainly inform themselves more. Tell us that.
For sure. You can go to our website, which is vlwlibya.org. We also have a very active Facebook page. So that's just the Voice of Libyan Women. And I think that everybody can be supportive by really kind of pushing their local representatives as well as the international representatives on the peace talks that are going on in Libya, and demanding where are the women, and just saying, why are we not having more women's representation?
Oh, thank you. That is terrific. And so are you. Thank you for all that you're doing, and stay safe, and stay in touch, because I would like to be of whatever support I possibly can, because you're being of support to me and giving me hope and excitement. So thank you. Shukran. Shukran etir.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. NASA has just released a new photograph of the blue marble, the planet Earth, and it's just breathtaking. The very first time any of us saw Earth was, of course, in 1972, when NASA's Apollo 17 astronauts first captured an entire hemisphere of the planet. The unprecedented images of Earth changed consciousness, really changed the way that people regarded where we lived. I mean, this was despite other distractions, despite the fact that Vietnam was going on, and between 1968 and 1972, and the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the Civil Rights Movement, and campus unrest and assassinations. And yet, as Neil deGrasse Tyson has pointed out in a statement about this new photograph from NASA, yet that is precisely when we voyaged to the moon and looked back from there and discovered Earth in that first photograph for the first time. And look at the fallout in consciousness from that. It's extraordinary. The year 1970 celebrated the first Earth Day. Also in 1970, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was born, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, were formed with strong bipartisan support. Bipartisan. In 1972, DDT was banned, and the same year the Clean Water Act was passed. And in 1973, the Endangered Species Act was enacted, and the catalytic converter was introduced, and unleaded automotive emission standards were set. These all were extraordinary, stunning admissions that we're in this together, and we better take care of this planet. Well, now Now at our disposal, we have not only a photograph of our home, this new picture, but we will have continual data of our planet, captured 13 times a day by the Robotic Deep Space Climate Observatory. The initials of the mission are Discover, a specially designed space camera and telescope, and it's launched and positioned about 1 million miles from Earth. It rocketed away in February, and it reached its final orbit a month ago in June at Lagrange point 1, L1, about 1 million miles from Earth. A Lagrange point is a position where the gravitational pull of two large masses precisely equals the centripetal force required for a small object to move with them. For our purposes, that means that a Lagrange point is a spot at which a satellite can maintain a fixed position relative to Earth. So the data that comes back means that we'll now be able to measure and track sun-induced space weather as well as global climatic trends in ozone layers, in aerosols, vegetation, volcanic ash, reflectivity, all in high resolution, which is precisely the kind of data that our civilization needs to make informed decisions about cultural and political and scientific issues. But when I look at that photograph, tears come to my eyes, because the planet is so small, so seemingly alone, so fragile, so utterly, intensely beautiful. The concept is so difficult to grasp that it's truly surreal, and yet it's the realest thing that we know, that this is our only place in the universe or the multiverse. This is our only spaceship surrounded by vast darkness, and that we would abuse it is unthinkable. I suggest, if you're prone to do so, that you download a photograph from NASA from this new set of pictures and put it, as I have this one, on my desk, so that every day I'm reminded this is our spaceship home, and we have to be homemakers in the best sense of the word. It's time for another short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I've always been fascinated by certain insects. I wouldn't quite say as feminist models, but, showing that there are different ways of doing things. For example, the praying mantis. He screws her, she bites off his head. Anyway, that didn't mean that is a real model, but we'll learn more about real stuff and evolutionary wonders in the segment coming right up.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Marlene Zuk, rhymes with book, even though it's spelled Z-U-K, is an evolutionary biologist and a writer, and she researches animal behavior and evolution, mostly using insects as subjects. She teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior at the University of Minnesota, and she's the author of 4 books for a general audience, and she's a lively, accessible writer. One book is Sexual Selections, What We Can and Can't Learn About Sex from Animals. Another is called Riddled with Life, Friendly Worms, Ladybug Sex, and the Parasites That Make Us Who We Are. The third book is Sex on 6 Legs, Lessons on Life, Love, and Language from the Insect World. And most recently, Paleo Fantasy, What Evolution Really Tells Us About Sex, Diet, and the Way We Live. All of them very interesting, as is her TED Talk, which is now newly posted online. Be sure and check out that TED Talk. And here is Marlene Zuk. Welcome to the program, Marlene.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's very exciting to have an evolutionary biologist on the program. Your books are fantastic, and with great titles, I might add, but also great content inside. So I could start. Oh, I don't know where to start with friendly worms and ladybug sex, or sex on six legs, lessons on life, love, and language from the insect world. Let's start there. What do we have to learn from insects about sex?
I think people often have this idea that nature dictates a very restricted set of sex roles, and people often talk about biology as being something, oh, well, you can't escape biology, and, you feminists may be trying to do all of these newfangled things, but in fact, biology is dictating a very narrow set of roles for what women can do. And one of the things I love about studying insects is that they demonstrate that that's just not the case. I mean, it's not so much that, oh, look, we should imitate praying mantises because, they actually, eat their husbands', heads after they start mating. I mean, that's obviously ludicrous, and I think sometimes people, take it like that. But it's more that when you look at nature, there's all kinds of different solutions to, what's of course the same problem. How are you going to perpetuate your genes into future generations? But
right.
There's so many ways to do that don't rely on what we think of as conventional sex roles. So that's one of the reasons I like insects, is because they're so varied and they do so many different things that I find it very liberating.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. At one point years ago, I got into arachnids, who are not strictly speaking at all insects.
Right, but
but I was so afraid. I grew up as a child so afraid of spiders that I decided, okay, I need to look at them more closely, because I do know one thing, that if you look closely enough at anything in this extraordinary universe, you will find something absolutely breathtakingly wonderful about it, and wondrous and awesome in the real sense of the word. So I got into studying spiders, and a long poem came out of it, that is in one of the earlier books of poems. And they were incredible. The wolf trap spider, and the different things that they did, and the wit of how they were constructed. And that's just one or two spiders that I had the time and the drive to study. So your work must be quite extraordinary and filled with thrill.
Yes, and I do think that that's something. I mean, sometimes you feel like, oh, the fact that I know obscure facts about animals that no one cares about, or if they do care about them, it's not in a positive way. That I'm not sure how much of a reward that is, but it is a reward to me. And I think you're right that once you start looking closely at almost anything in the universe, you end up being filled with admiration, and it makes your life richer, and I think that is absolutely what's happened. And so to to bring this back to, I know a topic of great interest, I think that's particularly true for matters pertaining to sex and mating and gender and all of this. There's no place where you see a more dizzying variety of behaviors and appearances and ways of doing things than when you look at other organisms. One of my favorite topics has to do with maternal behavior, because everybody of course thinks, oh, women are women mothers, and there's
right.
this inescapable way in which women are mothers, and again that's of course dictated by biology, and when you start looking at animals, you recognize that that's just not true.
How did you get into this field, Marlene?
I liked animals a lot as a child, but I think that's completely unremarkable. I think many people like animals as a child, and it took me many years to realize that actually meant I could do biology. I mean, I was totally not a science nerd as a child. I vacillated about being an English major, ended up deciding that it would be easier to do English or pursue my interest in literature or pursue my interest in writing on the side and be a scientist for my day job than vice versa, since it would be difficult to be a literature professor or an author and then keep a lab in the garage, which is certainly true. It was a sensible decision at the time. So that that was part of it, but no, one of the people ask me this a lot, and I honestly don't think that that kind of stereotype of, oh, you start out keeping snakes in your pocket or wanting telescope to look at the stars or anything like that. No, I was really not that kind of kid. I mean, I did look at insects, certainly, but that was mostly because I grew up in Los Angeles, and it's not like I was going to be looking at deer in the backyard because we didn't have deer in our backyard.
Right, of course. Well, I must say though that the English major background shows in your work, because they're the books that you've written for the general public are fascinating. You're as wonderful a science writer as Natalie Angier, whose work I love.
Wow, that is high praise indeed. She's one of my heroes. Absolutely. Thanks so much. But and again, I think that that's something that a lot of scientists don't think is important, or they think it's kind of a an add-on that, but writing books for the general public, that's just something that you can kind of knock out in your spare time, and it's not really the real work. And I hope that my students understand that it is the real work.
Of course, it is.
This is how this is how people find out what you're doing. This is how people find out how to appreciate what science is.
Well, I mean, if you don't educate the public in these terms, unfortunately, the fundamentalist and the right wing and the anti-science people and the climate change deniers and all of them you leave the field to them, and ordinary folks, the media doesn't do a hell of a great job, and science is fought in the schools now. So I mean, if you don't do some basic educating, how are people going to find out? And that affects in turn politicians, it affects funding for research and for science. So it's very important, and you have a lively, wonderful wonder communicating style, which is very infectious and delicious. Talk a little bit about your most recent book, The Paleo Fantasy, What Evolution Really Tells Us About Sex, Diet, and the Way We Live. Does this mean we're basically carnivores?
No, in fact, quite the opposite. I got interested. I got interested in the way people thought about evolution and how it applies to their lives, and I felt like there was this recurring theme coming up of people always referring back to the way they think it was back in the Stone Age, that, so every time there's, a discussion online about anything from childcare to diet to, exercise or, heaven's sakes, politics, you always get someone who says, well, but of course, the reason Thing X exists is because back in the Stone Age, when people were hunter-gatherers, we did this and we did that, and and again, I am particularly fascinated with how people do this about gender, but that isn't the whole topic of the book, and it's this idea that we can't escape, sort of the way we existed in these hunter-gatherer groups, and of course, obviously I'm an evolutionary biologist who works on sex differences. I'm not denying that that biology is hugely important. But I think that there's a misconception of how evolution works in some of these stories we tell ourselves, and that's what the book is focused on. So there's this idea that, humans were evolving along. We get those cartoons where, you've got an ape-like ancestor, and then you've got, like the early sort of form of human, and then finally you get a guy, and it's always a guy standing upright holding a spear. And then in the modern versions of it that are somewhat tongue-in-cheek, of course, you've got sort of this devolution being portrayed with the guy then having a big paunchy belly and clutching a cheeseburger, or maybe hunched over a computer terminal or something like that, and the implication is, oh no, we were on this really great trajectory and then we fell from grace and it's all going to hell in a handbasket. And I wanted to point out that that's just not how evolution works. That evolution doesn't have a goal. We're not moving toward anything, and each form is not an improvement on the last form. All of the tips of the branches in the current tree of life are just as evolved as all the other tips of the branches, which means that everything that's alive today is just as evolved as everything else.
Right.
And but I think this idea that we were doing really well back in, and fill in the blank. Some people think we were doing really well in the 1950s. Some people think we were doing really well, pre-industrial revolution, when we had a more rural, often idealized rural, lifestyle. Or I think it is becoming very popular to talk about, life in the Paleolithic was just great because we were adapted to this hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And there are some ways in which that's true, and certainly there's lots of ways you can demonstrate that there's a mismatch between what our bodies are doing now and how they evolved. But in a sense, it's always been like that. And so I wanted to so the book tried to look at evolution as a continuous process and to look at the many ways in which we can see that human evolution is continuing now, rather than relying on kind of this caricature of, oh, well, we should be living like people were back in the Stone Age, even if we knew what that was, which is often questionable.
Right. Well, they think in the common imagination, it's the Flintstones, which is...
Well, sure, and again, you look at how this, with the gender roles, you look at this, oh, well, but of course, and, males were dominant, and this is what, monogamy was, prevalent, or sometimes people think polygamy was prevalent. You get some interesting ideas on that regard.
Yeah, but whatever it was, that is what we're stuck with. And that defines us. And that's just ridiculous. It's patently,
absolutely.
So I'm so glad you're doing this work. This is so exciting. What are you working on now? And then unfortunately, we've got to go. I could talk to you for hours. But what are you working on now? Is there a new book in the works?
Not so. I have a germ of an idea, and it's still kind of churning around. I wanted to write about pets and domestic animals because I think that that's such a great way to explore, again, how we think about genes, evolution, and behavior. Because on the one hand, people are happy that Chihuahuas are really different from Great Danes, and we understand that that's been a process, admittedly through artificial selection, but through selection. On the other hand, you get all these people who are like, no, they're all like wolves. All dogs, they're always like wolves. And you think, really? So why would it be that we can change appearance but we can't change behavior? And what does that say about the way we think about the evolution of behavior? So anyway, that's you've now heard the whole germ of the idea, and I'm still tossing it around in my head and thinking about ways I could develop it. But
I hope you do it. Because I will read it. I hope you do it. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And anybody who has lived with a cat or a dog, cats mostly on my front.
Mine too. And my agent says, be very careful not to piss off the dog people.
Yeah, that's right.
She says this book sounds great, Marlene, but please, whatever you do, don't piss off the dog people because they're a great market.
She's right. She's a good agent. She's absolutely right. No, dogs are wonderful. It's just that there's
indeed.
It's just what I'm. Yeah, well.
Oh, absolutely.
The great joke of the dogs. Dogs have masters. Cats have staff.
Right. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Anyway, so are you, and I'm so grateful you're doing this work. And thank you for being with us today. And will you come back and talk to us again? That would be wonderful.
I would love to do that. Thanks so much.
Now it's time for one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will be back in just a minute with some fighting words. So don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again in time for some fighting words. I've been thinking about fatherhood lately, not only because recently Father's Day, which is this, wholly fabricated consumer holiday to celebrate dads, not only because Father's Day took place recently in June, but because of all of the hand-wringing over the new Bill Cosby revelations, in which he specifically mentions that, yes, he gave women quaaludes in order to have sex with them, and people wringing their hands and saying, well, we didn't believe the women earlier because he was America's dad. He, in the guise of Cliff Huxtable was his character's name, was just the dad everybody wanted, the perfect dad, the perfect families. And I've been thinking back to that series and the Huxtable family, which was lauded because, of course, at least it showed a black family that was a middle-class family and was recognizable to middle-class whites as, gasp, what do you know, being human. But there were problems with that family. He was a doctor, but we never saw him go on a house call. We never saw him discomfort himself in any way. His practice office was right next to the house, and he disappeared into it periodically. But we never saw him get an emergency call and have to leave and interrupt his life. His wife was a lawyer, and she did both jobs, all the time, classic double, triple superwoman. We never saw a housemaid or a houseman or a cleaning person, so we can only assume, and we also saw her doing this, that Claire did the cooking and did the washing and did the housekeeping and did the child raising and did everything and was a lawyer as well. And more than any of that, it was the kind of dad he was. It was good for comedy, yes, but he was not a mature dad. He was a boyish, impish, designer sweater wearing, don't tell your mom, or rather, you wait till your mother gets home, she'll deal with this kind of dad. And she always did. She was clearly the grown-up in the household. And while I was thinking about all of this, and how, in fact, in the series itself, 2 or 3 times, Cliff Huxtable refers to slipping something into the punch bowl so everybody would get a little tiddly, or giving a girl something to make her more erotic feeling, teasing his wife about that, which, of course, in hindsight now makes your hair stand straight up on the back of your neck. But while I was thinking about the Huxtable family and why does America mourn the tarnishing of this ideal family, which wasn't ideal, and this ideal dad, who to me was definitely not ideal, then along came a story about Hillary Rodham Clinton's father. And we all know that she was very close to her mother, who was, by all reports, an extraordinary woman coming from very hard Scrabble backgrounds and filling her daughter with possibility and love and strength. But the father, not so much. Now, I grant I have father issues. In full disclosure, any of you who've read my memoir, Saturday's Child, knows why. But in the case of Rodham, he was a conservative, segregationist Republican, and he was a very stern and gruff father who spanked his kids sometimes to excess, and who tore down, in those little biting comments, continually flowing 24/7, his wife all the time. He was also the kind of father who, if you got all A's, said, why aren't they A+, who never really liked to praise, who didn't believe in building up people's self-esteem, the works. And I thought, somewhere in between the patriarch, that is Rodham, he's dead now, and the Arrested Development, naughty boy dad, don't tell your mom, somewhere between those two poles, fatherhood is in real trouble. And we have to reinvent some new models that are caring, that are mature. I know at least 2 men who are fathering in a different way, parenting, in fact, precisely like that. Mature, caring, accepting responsibility. Not just another one of the kids, not just ripping off mom, whose responsibility the family really is, but parenting. But those few men that I can think of are hardly a critical mass, and fatherhood is in trouble. The Huxtables were not the opposite of what Cosby lived. They were a representation of what he lived, giggling and trying to get back in favor with his wife when he'd done something that made her angry. I can only imagine the real-life model for that. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you'll find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and on Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. and our senior producer is Crystal Williams-Chancellor. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. We are going on summer hiatus now, and I'm going to get some writing done. But we're already cooking up some great guests and new features for the program for the fall, when, by the way, the Women's Media Center itself will celebrate its 10th anniversary at the Women's Media Center Award Gala. And WMC Live, this program, will be back right after Labor Day, so mark your calendar and do not forget to join us in September, right here on Women's Media Center, live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.